Hello, Dr. Keith again. Today I'm going to talk about a significant problem in academic writing, and the problem is the word significant. Now, when writing a scientific research paper, significant has two distinct uses. One use is just in common English, so significant meaning important, etc. But it can also be used in a statistical context. So when writing a scientific research paper, unless I'm talking about statistical analyses of data, I avoid using the word significant. So let's look at an example of a sentence using the word significant. Dairy farming makes a significant contribution to global methane production. So what do we do when we can't use the word significant that we'd like to use? So I'm going to talk you through the process I would use to choose the word and also the words I would not choose to replace it. Now, a common approach when looking for alternative words to use is to use the thesaurus in the word processing package that you're using, or just a thesaurus as a book. So what I've done is I've taken that sentence, dairy farming makes a significant contribution to global methane production, and then in Word I've asked it to suggest alternative words for significant. And now I'm going to talk through which ones I would use and why and where, and which ones I would also not use and why. So starting off with words that I'd use, I'm going to run through it from where something is the least significant to where it is the most significant. The list of words from least significant to most significant using the thesaurus are these that you can use to replace significant with: considerable, substantial, important, major, central, critical. Where critical, to me, it feels a sort of similar magnitude to central, but there's just a bit of emotion attached to that word, but not so much as to make it unusable, because you want to write in that sort of neutral writing voice for academic writing. And then we have key and crucial, where crucial again to me sounds a bit like key, but there's a slight bit of emotion, but it's still neutral enough of voice for you to use. And then something that's the most significant, I would say, is fundamental. Now, looking at words that I wouldn't use, that the thesaurus will suggest and why, there's noteworthy, momentous and weighty. To me, they just feel a bit pompous, a bit exaggerated. Large and big, these just sound too much like words a child would use. They don't have that sort of professional tone to them. Sizable, I would avoid. I'm not quite sure why I'd avoid sizable, but just to my ear it just sounds a bit off, so I wouldn't use that. And the last one that's often suggested is hefty. Now, hefty is a very it's a slang, more of a slang word in English. So again, we don't want slang or vernacular creeping into our academic writing. And also, when you go into the thesaurus, there's words that have the meaning of significant as meaningful as an adjective. And I wouldn't use any of those, but I think you'd know they don't sound right. So these are knowing, meaning, suggestive, expressive and pointed. So, quick example, if we thought dairy farming was quite important, quite significant, we might say dairy farming makes a considerable contribution to global methane production, but where it's at its most important, I would say something like dairy farming makes a fundamental contribution to global methane production. Now, thinking about significant, we also have the opposite of significant, which is insignificant. Insignificant isn't a statistical term, but it still has that feeling of statistics, and also actually insignificant to me, it has a bit of emotion attached to it. It's a little bit slangy, so I would avoid using insignificant. as well. So let's give an example of a sentence with insignificant in it that we'll play around with. So consider the sentence, recycling bottle tops makes an insignificant contribution to international sustainability targets. So looking at the thesaurus with the word insignificant, the words that I would use to replace it with starting with something that is the least significant, the most insignificant, moving to the most significant would be, the least significant would be marginal, and I would also use minimal and minor. But I'd also consider using recycling bottle tops is not an important contributor or does not make an important contribution to as well. So there's some options there. Now trivial comes up as well. You know, trivial, I'd personally try and avoid it, but you might just be able to get away with it for a word as insignificant. But it has kind of emotional feeling to it to someone who speaks English as a native speaker. Now the words that I wouldn't use for insignificant that a thesaurus will put out as suggestions for you are irrelevant, immaterial, inconsequential, paltry, petty, trifling. Again, these sound a bit exaggerated, a bit pompous. And the other options it will give you are slight. Slight has a wrong feel about it as well. I would avoid this. Unimportant. Unimportant has a bit of an emotional feeling to me. It's a bit judgmental. And lastly, of no consequence and not worth mentioning. Now these are quite exaggerated. These are quite exaggerated as well. So I'd avoid those. And lastly, avoid the word small. So let's go back to that sentence about recycling bottle tops. So if recycling bottle tops was really almost absolutely no use whatsoever, but not quite, you might want to say recycling bottle tops makes a marginal contribution to international recycling targets. And if it makes a little bit more of a contribution, you might consider recycling bottle tops makes a minor contribution to international recycling targets. So I hope this has given you an insight into how someone who's got experience writing papers thinks about the English they're using and thinks about the English that they absolutely won't use, but also more importantly gives you some options to play around with for that most significant of word that feels like it should be really useful but you can't use. So I hope this has helped you. If you've got any comments or requests of things you want me to talk about, please leave a comment below. Like, subscribe, and thank you for your time.